there's almost nobody out here in the West who's dying for the faith right now. But if you're a priest listening to this, you could lose out on your ability to become a Monsignor, to become a bishop if you contradict certain things.
How did you choose the lives of the saints, you know, the people that you've highlighted in this book? How did you choose them? How did you narrow that list down?
Well, it's good that you said narrow it down. Some people have asked me if we were able to find enough saints to fill this book, you know, people who were persecuted by the Catholic hierarchy. And I had to tell them, well, you know, the list was a lot longer than we could fit into one book. It would have been a tome, you know, a giant doorstop, multi-volumes, if we decided to put all the saints who had been persecuted by their own leaders within it. Ultimately, we wanted to have saints in this book whose lives were really defined by persecution from the church itself in some way. Maybe they were martyred. Maybe it was just an integral part of their story, whatever it was. So that was part of the criteria. The other one was we wanted it to be a truly Catholic book, you know, diversity in the Catholic sense, right? So we have a saint from Australia, North Africa, Europe, the Americas. It's all over the place. It spans all the way from St. Paul, really Jesus. We start with the king of all saints, Jesus, straight up through to the 20th century with Blessed Fulton Sheen. So we want to give people a complete taste of the types and flavors of persecution that they can expect at the hands of the hierarchy. You know, it's tough because Catholics, we can tend to err on either side here. You know, one side says, well, it's not our job. We're lay people. You know, most of us here listening, we're lay people. And we're like, well, it's not, I can't do anything about the church. I should probably just obey. I should be silent. Maybe I should even just ignore it. And I think that has a sense of false meekness to it. You know, we are supposed to confront problems within the church, frankly. We do have a role as lay people. At a bare minimum, even just with those around us, I mean, everyone's going to hear about these scandals and these problems. And if we don't have a good answer for it, if we can't tell people what's right and what's wrong, if we're just kind of shrugging our shoulders and like, well, you know, it's Rome. Oh, well, it's the Pope. You know, that's not going to convince anybody to join our faith. And that's not some numbers game here. You know, we really believe that we have eternal life, that the church gives us access to eternal life. And we want people to be a part of that. So false meekness is one bad error. And frankly, the other one is when we start to go into pure attack mode. You know, we get so outraged by the scandals within the church, by the errors, by the sin within the clergy, that we rail against it, but we lose our charity during that. And it's very tough to toe that line between these two extremes, but we have to. We have to correct error. We have to love the church. And I thought of no better way to do that than to look at the people who had done that before, because it's a very practical thing. It's very hard. There's no pure principles one can follow. You have to really be a man of prayer, a woman of prayer, and to study lives of the saints, frankly, to understand how we're supposed to navigate this craziness right now. I've actually come to love these stories in a particular way because they really do demonstrate the divine. I think you brought up the two that are just perfect in this, St. Mary and St. Bruno. So I'll start with St. Mary just real quick. She was in 19th century Australia. She's actually the first Australian saint, and she felt called to found a religious order focused on education of the poor. Seems like a beautiful thing. I don't know who would be against it. You know, without getting into all the details, her bishops in Australia really were. They didn't like that she wanted to be able to manage it independently of them. They wanted it completely under their control. And there are very practical reasons why this shouldn't have been the case and why Mary fought all the way up to Rome to be able to have a certain degree of independence. So Mary, she drew the line very, very well. She knew what the Lord was calling her to do, but she also respected the authority of the bishops. So when they would condemn her, when they would push her out of their diocese, whatever the consequences were, frankly, all the way up to a false excommunication. I urge people to look at the book. I mean, she's one of the few saints that can say she was excommunicated. She did obey their authority, even sometimes when it was improperly exercised, as long as that was directed against her. What she never did was give up on her mission that she felt came from God to found this order the way that she thought it needed to be founded. She endured with faith, and she was patient in this, even while she endured contradiction against herself. And it was a very good rule to follow there. I think St. Bruno is in the same category. His story really gears up in the 1100s, and long story short with him, he was a senior advisor to 3 popes. And very, very close with the Curia, had just a lot of power, honestly. But when push came to shove, he saw a pope made a wrong decision in regards to an emperor. He gave up church authority. The pope gave up Pascal II authority properly due to the church to civil authorities, which contradicted church teaching. And Bruno called the pope out on it. very charitably, but he did so publicly because he knew that it would lead people into error, would lead people to think the wrong things about what the church was teaching. So he took all of his power, all of his authority, he put it on the line, and the Pope frankly didn't like that. He pushed him to the side. It's kind of like Cardinal Burke or Bishop Strickland right now. You say something that the Pope thinks is against him personally, you're on the outs. Maybe they weren't martyred, maybe their head's not on the chopping block, but they're certainly not in any sense, they don't have power anymore. And that's exactly what happened to Saint Bruno. He was willing to sacrifice the authority, the power that he had for the sake of the truth. And, that's frankly the way that he died. He never came back into power, and that was fine because he stood for Catholic doctrine. And I think the story shows a couple things. One, you can see a strange echo. I can't know Pope Francis's heart, but it's reported that he conceives of these people as contradicting his program, people like Strickland and Burke, as being some sort of personal enemies, as opposed to trying to be a corrective against what they see as errors or confusion going on within the church. And that's what happened with Pascal II. He's Bruno was presenting this very charitably. He's just saying, hey, we have to define what's the church power, what's the civil power. We just have to be clear on this. And the Pope took it very personally. You're my enemy, essentially. And because of that, his high point in the Curia, he was put on the outs. It's like the type of quote unquote martyrdom we'll face today. It's a white martyrdom, not a red martyrdom. Very few of us in the West here, you read that story from the Philippines. They're dying for the faith right now. There's almost nobody out here in the West who's dying for the faith right now. But we could be called to lose out on a promotion. We could be called to lose out on any influence we may have with our bishop or with our priest if we decide to contradict some errors that we see. If you're a priest listening to this, you could lose out on your ability to become a monsignor, to become a bishop if you contradict certain things. But that's a very small price to pay to stand up for orthodoxy ultimately. And St. Bruno showed that story. I should mention in this too, he was supported in the end. The church came back and supported his position after his death. And they said, no, Bruno was 100% right on this. We have to listen to him.
I want to talk to you about the Venerable Archbishop Fulton Sheen. I'm a traditional Catholic, and a lot of us are conflicted over the guy. Why? Because we loved him. We love his preaching, his clarity. We love just his presence, of course. And then towards the end of his life, things seem to be a little fuzzy and weird. And, there's these weird conversations he would have towards the end of his life. And we all wondered, what in the world has happened? And you talk about what has happened in this book. So can you break that down for us? What did happen towards the end of the Venerable Fulton Sheen's life?
Fulton Sheen was a man who in the public sphere, he had a golden touch. It was like everything he touched just became absolutely successful. His TV program, successful. Charities, successful. Raised money, up the wazoo. He would talk to people, they'd become Catholic within a few months. It was absolutely amazing. His life, though, was defined in many ways by this quiet struggle with his own cardinal in New York, Cardinal Spellman. And we get into the nitty-gritty details in the book, but long story short, my sense is Cardinal Spellman wanted to test him. He had milk, dried milk, donated from the government, Cardinal Spellman that is, and he gave it to Bishop Sheen to distribute to the poor, and he told Bishop Sheen to pay for it. And Bishop Sheen said no, he wasn't going to pay money for the poor, for milk for the poor that Cardinal Spellman got for free. So Cardinal Spellman got livid because it was a debate between a cardinal and a bishop. It went all the way up to the Pope, which, is kind of a ridiculous thing if you think about it. The Pope has to sit there deciding between two grown men who has to pay for milk. And you have the receipts. So, pray for the Pope. He can make some tough decisions, but he also probably has to deal with a lot of stupid things. But the Cardinal just swore revenge against Bishop Sheen, and he got it in the end. He was kicked out of his TV show. He was moved out of his charitable position and the Congregation for the not the Doctrine of Faith. I'm mixing them up. But he had a big role in charity in the world. And then he was moved out of New York City and off to Rochester, New York, a small diocese, where he was totally ill-suited for the role. He used to be a speaker, a fundraiser. Now he was an administrator. And he really objectively, he failed at it. And I think Bishop Sheen would forgive me for saying that here. Just to put some data points on it, within 3 years of being an actual administrative bishop, he had crowds of people protesting him in his car, driving through the town, driving through the streets of Rochester over his decisions. He had about half the priests in his diocese sign a public letter against him, essentially saying they had no faith in him. And, it was reported that he himself admitted that he was pretty much done being bishop and he was going to retire as soon as possible. I had to parse out a lot of, because he is the most recent saint. A lot of it was guarded under a veil. So you kind of have to read into things a little bit. So what I did was I really was trying to pray with Bishop Sheen, now off to his eternal reward, to figure out where he was at. And I got this sense reading his autobiography, and I put a lot of this in the book, that he recognized his need for this exact breaking, that we can look at it from human terms, right? And in many ways, we want success for ourselves and for the church. And it looked like he had both. He was successful for himself. He was raising money for the church. He was spreading the gospel. He was doing all these things. But in the end, what God cared about most of all about Bishop Sheen himself was Bishop Sheen's soul. And he admitted in his autobiography that there were still parts of his life that he wanted fundamental control over, that he really didn't see God's providence in. The way he put it was there were still parts of his soul that weren't swept clean of atheism. And my sense is that God sent these trials and brokenness as a way to purify him even more in the last days of his life, confronting him with failure so that he could have a greater degree of glory in heaven. I can see that because he seems to imply it. And frankly, it's the way he dealt with the Jewish people through the Old Testament. It's the way he's dealt with his church so much through history. It's the way he deals with us personally. Yes, some of these people were really set aside from youth. That God does that. That's true. Many of them were normal folks. You wouldn't have known at their earliest age that they were going to be written about in hagiographies and put into big tomes or something like that. Most of the saints in heaven, they're unnamed, they're unknown, they're people like you and me. And I think it's worth remembering that God does provide us the amount of grace that we need if we cooperated to do the exact same thing. And he also presents us with the exact circumstances within our lives that will shape us to be able to do that. So I think it's hard to understand this with the saints because it's just like, wow, they overcame this big thing, but we don't know the preparation and the grace that they got in that. And I have to believe, translations have it that the yoke is easy and light. I like the translation better that our yoke is well fitting. God is carving our particular cross for us. We're supposed to imitate him in our own crosses, and he designed it to fit our own lives, putting us here and now with our situation and circumstances to become saints like them.
Did you like that video? It's okay. You can admit it. It's perfectly fine. Hey, we cover the big stories of our day, from inside the church to outside the church to all points in between, and we do it from a Catholic perspective. It's called A Catholic Take. It's a radio program Monday through Friday. We live stream it right here on this channel, by the way, so make sure to subscribe, like, and share. We would be very grateful to you. And don't forget, you're going to want to watch this video right here because you don't want to miss anything.